Welcome to the Traveling Flaneur podcast, where I'll talk about the economy, politics, history, and culture of the places I've visited. I'll also give you travel tips, recommend places to visit, things to do, and the best food. The life of a flaneur is that of an observer, a person who wanders aimlessly with eyes always open to any opportunity. It is a person who is in no hurry and prefers the journey over the destination. I believe that in this hurried world we live in, we need more flaneurs, and I hope you enjoy the perspective from a traveling flaneur and maybe become one in your next trip. Hi, and welcome to Chile. This incredible country is known as the country of poets, and it is a narrow strip of land that's located on the west coast of South America. With more than 6,000 kilometers of coastline, Chile is the longest country in the world. And being the longest country in the world makes it a country full of contrasts. And you can go from the Atacama Desert in the far north to the mountains of the Chilean Patagonia or even to the glaciers that will take you almost to Antarctica, all in the same country. The interesting thing is that apart from being very long, Chile is also one of the narrowest countries on the planet with an average of 175 kilometers from east to west. As I usually do in my introductory episodes about a country, today I'm going to tell you everything you need to know to visit Chile. But before that, I'm going to share some fun facts about this country, and the first one is that Chile is the most seismically active country in the entire world because it's located in the Pacific Ring of Fire. And although I will talk about this in more detail later, basically here's where the largest earthquake ever recorded in the world occurred. Another interesting fact is that Chile has the driest desert in all of the world, the Atacama Desert. And over here are the oldest mummies in the world, which experts say were mummified 7,000 years ago. My last fun fact is going to be about volcanoes, because as I told you, Chile is in the Ring of Fire, and this makes a country very full of volcanoes. Specifically, Chile has about 90 potentially active volcanoes, and of those, about 60 have historical records of their activity. So now that you know some of the things that make Chile a very unique country, I'm going to move on to talk about the macroeconomic context of this country so you know everything before you visit. Chile has around 20 million inhabitants, and its GDP is going to be approximately $340 billion, which translates into a GDP per capita of around $17,000. This means that per year, on average, a person is going to earn or spend around $17,000. This number is going to place Chile as one of the highest income economies in all of Latin America, having more than double the GDP per capita of Colombia, and also even surpassing Brazil, which has a GDP per capita of 10,000, or Mexico, which has 13,000. The unemployment rate in Chile is also going to be better because it's around 8%, and its poverty levels are going to be close to 6% with only 2% of extreme poverty. So as you can see, by figures, this is going to be one of the most prosperous and economically successful countries in the entire region, and this is mainly going to be due to two reasons. The first one is its open economic model, which has secured good relations and international trade. And the second one is going to be all of the natural resources that Chile possesses. Because Chile, like a typical Latin American country, is going to be extremely strong and reliant in commodities, and specifically around fishing and mining that have driven the Chilean economy for many, many years. Metals will represent the largest percentage of mining exports, with copper being the main export. Chile is the largest producer and exporter of copper in the entire world, and copper miners are located usually in northern Chile, and right now there is a boom for this metal because it's used for the production of solar panels, wind turbines, and electric cars. Chile is also a great exporter for lithium, which is another very important resource today for creating all of the batteries. Regarding fishing, Chile has become the main fishing nation in South America and one of the most important fishing countries in the entire world. Because, of course, with so much coastline and all of the access to the Pacific fishing, this is going to generate products such as fish meal and fish oil, which are exported to Europe and to the US for the production of animal feed and industrial oil. It also has some products for consumption that are going to be quite exclusive, but I'll talk about this later when I explain a little bit of Chilean gastronomy. And well, of course, besides from fishing and from mining, there are also exporters of many, many fruits because they have the entire mountain range, so they have good weather for this and good variety, and especially they will have a lot of fruits when Europe and the US do not because they have the opposite seasons. So, for example, all of the Chilean raspberries and cherries in December are going to be quite coveted by countries in northern hemisphere. And finally, how can we forget about Chilean wine? Chile is the fourth largest exporter of wine in the world, and it exports around 750 million liters per year. Chile's main trading partners are China, the US, and the European Union. And if we talk about imports, Chile will mostly bring products from China, also US, and Brazil, mainly buying gas, gasoline, oil, and cars. Regarding currency, Chile uses the Chilean peso, which is abbreviated as CLP, and $1 is going to be equivalent to approximately 1,000 Chilean pesos. But a tip is that probably you won't need a lot of local currency during your visit because credit and debit cards are accepted everywhere. And also, tips are going to be included in all of the restaurants that you visit. So, literally, I only exchanged money to collect some of the notes, and because the Torres del Paine are on the 1,000 peso bill. But otherwise, I paid for everything else with my card and I never needed cash. Now, I'm going to move on to the political context of this country and I'll start talking about its current president. Because the current president is called Gabriel Boric, who is the youngest president the country has ever had and one of the youngest presidents in history because he began his term at the age of 36 and he is currently 39, which means that he's one of the few 30-something presidents in the world. Boric became into power after a series of protests that arose in 2019 due to the inequality that existed in this country, and where his ex-president, which was Sebastián Piñera, was part of that elite. In response to these protests, the government at that time agreed to draft a new constitution, which would be voted on a referendum. However, in 2022, they proposed the text was rejected by Chileans, and currently the constitutional process is still ongoing with new attempts to draft a consensual text. And if I'm talking about Chilean politics, I cannot leave out one of the elements that was a mark in this entire country, and it's the military dictatorship that went on from September 11, 1973 to March 11, 1990. This dictatorship was led by Augusto Pinochet, and he overthrew the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende, who died during the bombing of La Moneda Palace. Immediately afterward, the military junta, with Pinochet at its head, implemented a series of repressive measures such as the suspension of constitutional rights, the dissolution of the National Congress, the prohibition of political parties, and especially tremendous censorship in the media. During this dictatorship, serious human rights violations occurred, such as arbitrary detentions, forced disappearances, extrajudicial executions, and the forced exile of thousands of Chileans. However, Chile's economy made many advances during these years because the regime implemented radical neoliberal reforms advised by the so-called Chicago Boys, who were a group of economists from University of Chicago. These reforms included the privatization of state-owned enterprises, the reduction of public spending, trade liberalization, market deregulation, and pension system reform. Then, from 1982, Chile started experiencing a severe economic crisis that led to mass protests. And this, along with international pressure and the organization of the opposition, led to a plebiscite in 1988 where citizens voted to have an end for the dictatorship. The legacy of this period continues to be a matter of intense debate in Chile because some highlight all of the economic advancement and measures and modernization that remain to this day, but it clearly became accompanied by violence, human and social cost, as well as censorship and repression. In 1998, Pinochet was arrested in London after an extradition request from Spain for torture during his dictatorship. Although he returned to Chile for medical reasons, he faced multiple accusations of human rights abuse. Afterwards, in the year 2000, Ricardo Lagos was elected as the first socialist president since Allende, achieving economic and social advances. And then, in 2006, Michelle Bachelet, also a socialist, assumed the presidency, facing student protests and strike. During her term, she established social reforms and savings derived from the copper boom. And then, years later, Sebastián Piñera came to power for the first time, making the end of the socialist era. During his first term was when Chile faced a devastating earthquake and also the rescue of the 33 trapped miners that probably you've heard about because they're in a lot of cases and also there's a movie about. After this, Bachelet returned in 2014 but faced corruption scandals and an economic slowdown, which led Piñera to return to power. And that's where we get to where we started in the 2019 protests that brought the current president to power. So I just gave you a long history of Chile's politics, but a mini historical summary of Chilean politics would be that there was a dictatorship, then there were several democratic governments that alternated between socialists and conservative leaders until the youngest president in Chilean history came to power. So far, that's regarding politics. But now I'm going to move on into one of my favorite sections of my podcast, and it's everything I highlight about the culture and the society of Chile. And there are going to be three things that I mostly want to highlight, and those are going to be the accent, the literature, and its food. And I'll start with the accent because, let's face it, Chilean Spanish is the most difficult to understand of all possible accents. And that's why I think it's an important thing to highlight. The easiest way to explain this accent is that if the word has an S at the end, it will sound like an I. So for example, in Colombia we would say ¿Cómo estás? But in Chile it's going to sound ¿Cómo está ahí? Because they put an I instead of the S. And besides that, Chile is also going to be very particular on the slang and expressions they have because they sometimes might say a lot of weird words that not even people from Latin America or Spain may fully understand. Some of those examples are like cachai, which means do you understand? Weon, which means like friend or dude. Pololo or polola, which is going to be boyfriend or girlfriend. Fome, which will mean boring. Or al tiro, which will mean immediately, among many others. So Chilean Spanish is going to be something that if you're learning Spanish, of course you'll find it very hard because even me, that I am a Colombian and I speak natively Spanish, I'll find it hard to understand them. The second thing that I want to highlight is going to be the literature, because Chile has been the birthplace of some of the most important writers in all of Latin America, and in fact, in the entire world. You've probably already heard of Pablo Neruda or Gabriela Mistral, but perhaps you didn't know that both of them won the Nobel Prize in Literature. Gabriela Mistral was the first Latin American person to win it in 1945, and she was one of the first great pioneers of education and women's rights in Latin America. And Pablo Neruda, well, he was the poet of love. His poems have been translated into dozens of languages, and if you've ever had a poem that's dedicated to you in Spanish, there's a good chance that it was a poem by Pablo Neruda. In Chile, you can visit some of his houses that are now museums, such as La Chascona in Santiago or La Sebastiana in Valparaíso, which not only show his life, but also show you a little bit of his artist soul. Chilean literature doesn't stop only with the Nobel Prize winners, though. We also have Isabel Allende, which is one of the most widely read authors in Spanish, and she's also Chilean, and her novels, like The House of Spirits, have reached millions of readers worldwide. Or there's also Nicanor Parra, known for his anti-poetry, among many, many others. What I like most about Chilean literature is that it has a mix of nostalgia with magical realisms and social critique, which is why I would also highlight this in its Chilean culture, and I would recommend that you read either a novel or a poem by one of these authors before you visit Chile because it will definitely give you a vibe of how this country perceives itself. And finally, let's move on to the third thing that I want to highlight. And if you've already listened to my other episodes, you'll know that I'm a big foodie and it's Chilean gastronomy. Being between the Pacific Ocean and the Andes mountain range, the variety of ingredients that Chile is going to have will be enormous, and they're going to have many, many delicious plates. One of the most traditional dishes is going to be pastel de choclo, which is a kind of pie that's made with ground corn, meat, onion, hard-boiled egg, olives, and sometimes raisins, and all of this will be baked until golden brown on top. It's like a mix between a cake and an empanada, but much tastier. It's very, very good. Another dish you cannot miss is going to be curanto, which is a tradition from southern Chile, especially on Chiloé Island. And this dish is going to be cooked underground with hot stones, and it includes seafoods, meats, potatoes, empanadas. All of them will be steamed and covered with giant leaves called nalcas. And if you also like seafood, Chile will be then your paradise because you're going to have machas a la parmesana, which will be delicious. You might find also sea urchins and fried conger eel, and all of this are going to be just some of the delicacies that you'll be able to find on this country. And well, now that you know about Chilean economy, politics, and culture, I'm going to close this episode by giving you some travel tips that you should know before you visit Chile. So, first, how long should you stay? Chile is a very long country. Literally, we were talking about this, one of the longest countries in the world, so the ideal time is going to depend a lot on which area you want to explore. If you're only going to Santiago, the capital, and its surroundings like Valparaíso or Viña del Mar, or maybe even the Casablanca Valley vineyards, 5 days should be enough. But if you want to go north to places like the Atacama Desert, or south to Torres del Paine and Patagonia and Lake District, I would then recommend staying at least 2 or 3 weeks to enjoy each place without rushing. When I went, I visited Santiago, Valparaíso, Viña, and Torres del Paine, which is in the Patagonia, and I stayed 9 days. So my recommendation will be considering all of this time, but of course, there is much more to see and experience, and I'm going to also mention all of these things as they will be options you might consider in your trip. Second tip is going to be what is the best time to visit. Since Chile is in the southern hemisphere, its seasons are going to be the opposite of those in Europe or North America, which means that summer is going to range from December to February and winter will be from June to August. If you want to hike in the south or visit Patagonia, of course, summer is going to be the best option. But if you go north, like the desert or the wine region or Santiago, anytime can be good. Over here, there's not a preference. So personally, I think the best months to visit the entire country are going to be November, early December, and March. Because for this one's, weather's going to be good, there are going to be fewer tourists, and price are going to be a little bit lower. I visited the country in December, so I'm going to tell you the itinerary based on my December trip. Third tip is if Chile is going to be cheap or expensive to visit. And the answer is it depends. If you compare it to other South American countries, Chile is going to be one of the most expensive countries. But you compare it to US, Europe, or even its neighbor Argentina, it's going to be cheaper. So to give you an idea, a meal on average on a restaurant can cost you between 10 and 20 US dollars, and a night in a hotel in Santiago can be around 80 to $150 depending on the area. But of course, if you move a little away from the most touristy places or if you decide not to eat one of the best things, you can also find much more friendlier prices. This is going to be like the average that I would recommend to fully enjoy the city. And finally, the last recommendation is going to be around paperwork needed for entry, because even though I don't know if you need a visa or not, and I would recommend checking it in the link that I'll put below, what you might need is that upon arrival, they'll give you an immigration slip that you must take with you until you leave the country. So make sure you don't lose that slip, because they're going to ask it for you when you're about to leave. So you don't want to be in trouble when you're being asked for it. So I hope that these tips helped you plan your trip even better, and that after this episode, you'll be even more eager to discover this country that has deserts, glaciers, mountains, beaches, wines, poets, and fascinating history. Tell me in the comments what you like the most about this episode, and share it with someone else who loves to travel. If you can, give me a review as well, because this helps me tremendously and it motivates me to give you more travel tips. And stay tuned, because next week I'm going to start all of this Chilean trip, and we're going to start in the capital of this long country. Enjoy your trip!